Welcome to Codex, a history of video games. I'm Mike Coletta.
And I'm Tyler Osby.
And boy, oh boy, do we got a great show today. Tyler is taking us back in time to an age of apples.
Oh, yeah. I got excited because we talked about doing a Mac gaming episode for a while, and I was like, yes, I love Macs. I love old Apple stuff. Let's talk about Mac gaming. And I'm just like a huge fan of the history of Macs and Apple in general. But I think before we get into the history of Macs, especially when we're talking about gaming on the Mac, we need to talk about a little bit further back. There's a rich legacy of Apple gaming, and it doesn't begin with the Macintosh in 1984. It begins with the Apple II.
Ooh, the infamous Apple II computer I hear so much about.
Yeah, so the first Mac came out in 1984, which was 36 years ago, which is a long time ago. But the Apple II, they've been selling for more than 40 years.
Wait, they sell them still?
Sorry. Yes. No, they do not sell them still. The Apple II, they sold 40 years ago. That's what I should say. They do not still sell them, but they did sell them for a longer than they should have. So
that's exciting.
Yeah.
It's like a PlayStation 2 in that way. They sold the PlayStation 2 for so long.
Yeah. Oh, they sold it for longer than the PlayStation 2 was sold by just a little bit. Well, I don't know when the PlayStation 2 actually finished being sold. I know the final game was FIFA 14, and it came out in like Brazil.
It's always a sports game. It's always a sports game.
Yeah, because they've been repackaging FIFA for like 6 years by that point for the PS2, I think. So the Apple II line of computers, they produced in some form for over 15 years. So it came out in 1977, and they didn't truly discontinue it until 1993, which was almost a decade after the first Macintosh. So before we get into the Macintosh, which will be a future episode, we got to talk about what came before, and that's the Apple II. But before...
Yes. Okay. I just had, so this is the computer that like people like are fondly like remembering and trying to collect, right? The Apple II.
Yep.
Ooh. Okay. So sorry, but before.
Yes. So, but before the Apple II, we'll do a quick primer on where we're at in the history of computers because it's the Apple II, and that implies the existence of the Apple I, which is true. There was an Apple I. The Apple I was a home personal computer created by Steve Wozniak in 1976. In fact, he hand-built a lot of those first machines that were sold, which honestly, there weren't very many. I want to say there were like 600 machines. He didn't build all of those. They kind of assembled a team of several people that built most of them. And they actually sold them to a lot of them to this other computer sales store that packaged it with a keyboard and stuff like that. So like they didn't even make the keyboard and all that. They just made the motherboard and the wooden. I think they made the wooden case for it. I actually don't know for sure what they did.
Wait, it was a wooden case?
Yeah. If you Google a picture of an Apple I, it is pretty special, man.
Oh, I'm gonna Google this. I'm just blown away that because you see like wooden builds of computers now on like battle stations or whatever, or like our PC Master Race. You know, like people like wooden. You don't think that. It did start somewhere. Is it like the wood like on the side of a Volvo? That's what I picture in my mind.
No, it's not like wood paneling. I'm talking like it's like the wood that like your mom's old like hutch that has like keepsakes in it and stuff. It's like that kind of wood.
It's a rich mahogany. Is what you're telling me?
Yeah, it's something like that. It is like a piece of furniture. You know. That's
amazing.
Yeah. There wasn't much of a market for home computers at that time, mostly because they were like huge and just big and unwieldy, and because they were really hard to get output from. So it's hard to imagine a computer without a screen now. Obviously, that such a thing is just bonkers for like the server room, right? But most computers back in the day, in the 70s, they didn't really have a good way of showing the output. So like most forms of actually seeing what you were doing on the computer were really expensive, either literally printing the output on paper or connecting an expensive text terminal. So it was a very, very niche market at the time. But the Apple I was relatively inexpensive. It cost $666.66 in 1976. So that's about $3,000 in today's money. And it connected to a TV to see the output. That was like, it wasn't the first computer to ever be able to be hooked up to a TV, but it was like the first home computer that was actually attainable by mortal humans that could be hooked up to a TV so you could see the output.
That's right. Before this, all immortals owned computers.
Right. Only immortals owned computers. They were pretty expensive even for immortals too. Like we're talking vampires, we're talking ghosts.
Are werewolves immortal?
Probably. I would say so. If I had to guess, I would guess yes.
Welcome to Codex, a history of horror monsters. I'm Mike Coletta.
The Apple I used cassette tapes as its storage medium, like what you used to listen to music on in the 90s and like from the 60s on. I think that's when tapes were a thing. I don't know. This isn't the history of tapes. But they were really, really slow and unreliable. The Apple I ran on the MOS 6502 processor, which was an 8-bit microprocessor made by MOS Technology. It was the least expensive processor of its day by a huge amount, and that made it perfect for an relatively inexpensive system like the Apple I. That was that was one of the big innovations that allowed the Apple I to exist, was that 6502 processor, because it didn't suck and it was relatively cheap. It ran at 1 megahertz. And the Apple I had 4 kilobytes of RAM by default. And you could upgrade that, I think. Probably most Apple Is of the day were upgraded beyond 4 kilobytes. But
so it's like kind of a neat kilobytes or something?
Yeah, it's like you could double it. I think it went up to 48, but don't quote me on that. So it was like a neat experiment for enthusiasts. But ultimately, it wasn't that cool. Like it just didn't do a whole lot. But it was successful enough, though, for them to develop a successor. And Woz made that one, too. The aptly named Apple II, which was released a year later in 1977.
Wait, so it was only a year apart?
Yeah, only a year apart.
That's bananas.
They're actually fairly similar machines, but the Apple II just took a big advantage of like costs of hardware being way down, and because they had sold so many of the Apple I machines, they actually had money to like build a professional looking machine. So the Apple II was like way more professional looking. It had a plastic case instead of the wood case. It used that same 6502 processor at 1 megahertz and also came with only 4 kilobytes of RAM as standard, though that would get upgraded a lot as the years go by. I don't think very many people ran an original Apple II with only 4 kilobytes of RAM.
Could you even play like anything if it had 4 kilobytes of RAM?
Nah, probably not. That would have been really, really early days. It did have a bit more in the way of expansion options, though, both internal and external. You could like slot cards into like expansion slots on the Apple II, which was the really big upgrade between it and the Apple I, was it could just be expanded so much. And it also used tapes the same way the Apple I did, and they were just as crappy on the Apple II as they were on the Apple I. Nobody has nostalgia for the tape era. The
tape era is terrible. It's a terrible time.
It was like, seriously, it was like you would load up your computer and you would say load from tape, whatever the command is for that, and you would press enter, and then you would press play on your tape player, any old tape player that has a headphone jack, by the way, which plugs into the computer, and you press play on the tape player, and like 20 minutes later, you would have your program loaded into the Apple. That's not an exaggeration either. Depending on how big the program was, it could take a long time.
So it's like, I'm going to go boot up my computer, I'm going to load my program, and then I'm going to go take a shower. And then when I come out of the shower, I'm going to check it, and then I'm going to go get a cup of coffee. And then I'm going to come back and hope it's done. You're
going to come back, and it's going to say, load error, do it again. Because tapes were so unreliable, and they were just such garbage at the time, that it just really was it was a rough time. It was a rough time. There were a bunch of other computers released around this time, too. So we have the Commodore PET 2001, and the TRS-80, which was sold by Tandy in Radio Shack stores. So the PET also used the 6502 processor, and then the TRS-80 used the Zilog Z80 processor. Fun fact, that's also the processor used in the Game Boy Color.
Ooh, fun history fact there.
Yep. Like 20 years later. But what the Apple II had over these other machines was that it could display color graphics.
Whoa.
Yeah, big time whoa. So for our gaming purposes, obviously, this easily makes it the best gaming machine of its day. Right? Just because
totally.
It's in color. Yeah. The Atari 2600 came out a few months later, but even in those days, consoles were for plebs. Just kidding. But the Apple II was a great gaming machine. I probably, if we're talking like 1977, if I got to choose between an Apple II and an Atari 2600 as my gaming machine, I'm probably going to go with the Atari at this point in time.
Ooh, you heard it first here, folks. Before that's Tyler was going console over computer.
That's right. Give it about 5 more years. Get some hardware upgrades on the Apple II and some better games. We might have a different story here.
It's like I don't even know you anymore.
I know. But the Apple II was a great gaming machine because it was so versatile. So somebody could buy it for business, right? It said in air quotes. And then they could let their kids use it after work to play games on. And that way, it was fun for the whole family. And that's how a lot of people got these. Like, very few people, especially in the early days of the Apple II, would buy this, like, this is my gaming rig, right? They bought it to do work. They bought it to keep track of their finances, to do word processing, to write their great American novel that they are finally sitting down to write their master's thesis, which is what my mom did on my dad's Apple II in the mid-'80s. But you could also play games on it. So it was really nice in that way. Because like at Atari 2600, you had to make the decision to buy a gaming machine, and it's a lot harder to justify buying a gaming machine, especially in the 70s and 80s, over buying a business machine, right?
Business machine. I want to go into Best Buy and be like, I would like one business machine, please.
Yep, and they handed you an Apple II.
That's right.
And it would have been the Future Shop. I don't know if the Future Shop existed in the 80s, but that was Best Buy.
Was that a store? Was that a real store?
Yep.
Whoa.
Yeah, I remember driving all the way to Yakima to the Future Shop in Yakima to get a CD-ROM drive. Not from the Tri-Cities. It's like an hour and a half. It's like an hour and a half from Tri-Cities, probably. Maybe an hour if you're going fast. But they had CD-ROM drives, which we did not have on our old Macintosh Performer 400. So we went there to get a CD drive. And I remember that trip, and it was so much fun. And then we got a Future Shop in Kennewick, and then they got bought by Best Buy. And welcome to Codex, a history of computer stores in the Tri-Cities, Washington.
The people demanded it, and they got it, you know?
That's right.
I haven't read all the emails about the people that wanted us to get those.
So those other computers, it's not that they didn't have games, but having color capability on the Apple II, like that was the Apple II's big feature, and it put it above the rest. And like, even though a lot of people, my dad included, would use Apple's green screen monitor, mostly because it displayed text way better than a television could, especially televisions back in the day, which would have had to have the composite video signal produced by the Apple II converted to an RF signal just to get graphics on the TV. So it was like, already composite output is like not great fidelity in terms of graphics output, but it had to be converted to an RF signal for most TVs of those days, which just degraded the signal even further. So if you had a green screen Apple monitor and you were only writing text, like that was the way to go, because text was actually legible on one of those.
I think I had a computer with a green screen monitor, but I don't think it was an Apple II. I gotta ask my mom; she'll remember.
Yeah,
I need to ask
you
her
could
this.
have. Back in the day, you had the choice between the green monitor or an amber, like orange colored monitor, or like a black and white one.
All of this is just like in my mind, giving me anxiety about my color blindness right now. Like it's really throwing me off.
Yeah. So we're talking Fallout 3 monitors. Or Fallout New Vegas monitors.
You got to choose.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. Well, plus, if you were hooking it up to your TV, you'd have to like give up your TV while you're using the computer. So if you're like trying to write the Great American Novel, you can't watch Seinfeld at the same time. Seinfeld wasn't out in the 70s, but you couldn't watch. I don't know, what was a good 70s show?
Happy Days.
You couldn't watch Happy Days. No, Happy Days was about the 70s. It didn't.
No, well, Happy Days was about like the 60s.
It was about the 50s. Yeah, you're right. I was thinking. Yeah,
I think it came out. I watched that on Late at Night. You know.
You're right. Happy Days. Couldn't watch Happy Days while writing the Great American Novel if you were using your TV as output for your Apple II.
Is there a record of someone writing a Great American Novel on the Apple II?
George R.R. Martin writes all of his Game of Thrones books not on an Apple II. It's on like a really old DOS machine that he uses like WordPerfect 87 on or something like that. You could look that up, I'm sure. But he writes it on like... There's some floppy disk carrying The Winds of Winter, and he's going to drop it on the floor, and it's all going to be gone. Probably.
Does he not believe in computers that have the internet, or something? Maybe it's a distraction thing.
Yeah, I know there are some people that like to use old computers to do writing because of the distraction thing. I think there's a certain point where it's just like, okay, well, just unplug your computer from the internet. Then I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you're sacrificing a lot of time there to do that. I feel like.
Yeah. Yeah, and non-reliability too. Like if you're keeping your entire 600-page manuscript on a 160 kilobyte floppy disk drive, you're asking for trouble here.
Lots of trouble. You heard me, George? George listens. He knows.
That's right. Or you're keeping it on a cassette tape, I guess, which is even more trouble. You'd be better off just reading it aloud into the cassette tape.
It blows my mind that computers ran on cassette tapes. I don't know why I didn't put that because you would see like old computers, like the big room ones, and they'd always have like giant like I don't know, platters. What are the
reel to reel tapes?
Yeah, reel to reel tapes, the big ones. And so that makes sense that they would use smaller cassette tapes for personal computers. But I just didn't put that together until today.
Yeah, and there was also like a format that the average home computer user would have had access to too, because it used you plugged in literally any like tape player into the headphone. It was like a headphone out from the tape player into the Apple II or Apple I, and then you could go back and forth between that if you're writing stuff to the floppy disk or to the cassette tape. So like if people had access to those, you could go to the store and buy a pack of cassette tapes for a few bucks, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So that's cool.
That is cool.
The Apple II also included 2 paddle controllers when it was first launched, and because Apple knew that it was a pretty good gaming machine. Steve Jobs had been working before they started Apple. He worked at Atari and worked with Steve Wozniak to create the game Breakout. If you've ever played that, which is sort of a single-player Pong game where you bounce a ball around and break bricks with it. There's a whole story there of how he told Steve Wozniak to make this, and I'll give you $500, and Atari was paying him like $5,000 on the other side of that, and so he kind of did him dirty there a little bit, but it's a long time.
If you want to know more, you can listen to our episode on that because we cover that.
Oh, we do, don't we?
Yeah, we do. In those old episodes, we cover the whole Atari thing and Steve Jobs working there and the sketchy deals that were made. Sketchy deals.
Yeah, the sketchy deals and how Steve Jobs didn't eat anything but fruit and he smelled really bad.
Oh, really?
Yeah, pretty sure we talked about that.
Yeah, I think we did too. It sounds familiar.
Yeah. Anyway, in 1978, Apple ditched the cassette interface when they launched the Disk 2 drive, a 5.25-inch big floppy drive that made storing and retrieving files so much easier. It also cost $600 in 1978, so it wasn't cheap either, but later versions of the Apple II would include the disk drive in some way, either internally or externally. Very shortly after the disk drive came out, cassettes were just like gone. It was silly. Why would you ever use a cassette when you could just use a floppy disk? They were so much faster, so much better, so much easier to handle, just in general.
So much more fun too.
And if you're already dropping like a few G's on a computer, like another $600 for a disk drive that actually makes it worth using is like, if you can't afford that, you shouldn't even buy the computer, really.
I'm putting this into perspective too, because the original Apple I was $666.66.
Yes.
And the disk drive for the Apple II was almost as much money as that. But that's like with the inflation-wise, I mean, that's not that far after, right? So it's expensive.
So it was pricey, yeah. Being a computer user in the 70s, 80s, even into the 90s was like you were going to plunk down a couple of G's if you wanted a computer. This was like a purchase you made on the level of maybe a cheaper car or something. So you really had to have a good use for it. So one thing that's actually pretty neat about the cassette interface, so before we get completely away from cassette interface, is the fact that you can hook up any audio source to an Apple II, really. So back in the day, you would, like I said, you would hook up the tape player, playing normal tapes. But these days, we have way more ways of playing audio, including MP3 players and cell phones. So you can actually plug your phone, if you got the right adapters, of course, to get a headphone jack on your phone. You can plug your phone into an old Apple II and play MP3s of Apple II tapes from your phone to load them into the machine, which is actually really cool these days because that's a super easy way to like download a really old game and like load it into the Apple II, and like that's just really cool. You just play it straight off your phone. You load it in. Generally, what you would do is probably you would load like some kind of communication program that would let you you would plug like a serial cable into your computer or something, and then you would load it up based on that, and then use that to like write floppy disks or something. But that's actually really cool. I think that you can like play a tape from your phone into an Apple II to like sort of bridge the gap between modern technology and ancient technology.
That is really cool. I had no idea that was a thing.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. I've never actually done it because my Apple IIc does not have a cassette input port on it, because by the time that thing came out, cassettes were a thing of the past big time. But yeah.
So you got to get that disk drive.
That's right. But it's got a disk drive built in, so it's all good.
Oh, never mind. You're good to go.
Yeah. So as the years rolled on, the Apple II proved extremely popular, especially in schools. Apple was really good about setting up good deals with schools and school districts. So like, by the mid 80s, like every single school had Apple IIs, like they just were everywhere. And so they kept introducing new models throughout the 70s and 80s. So the original in 1977 was that 1 megahertz 4K RAM model with the cassette interface, oh my gosh, which sold over 6 million units, and it was discontinued in 1981. The Apple II Plus came out 2 years later in 1979. This one was mostly a software ROM update. So like they updated kind of the software on one of the chips inside the machine. They swapped out the integer basic that Steve Wozniak had written. It was a programming language that was included with the machine in the ROM. That was another cool thing about the Apple II was you booted it up and it had a programming language available to you right away. So even if you had no software for it, you could start writing software immediately. And in the original model, you used integer basic written by Steve Wozniak, but on the Apple II Plus, they swapped that for Microsoft Basic, which allowed you to use some floating point stuff. It was basically just a better version of Basic.
Interesting.
Yeah. It also came standard with 48K of RAM, which was like 10 times the amount of the machine that the machine had like just 2 years earlier. There was something that happened. Wikipedia says like some RAM just like got super cheap during those years. And so it was just like, toss more RAM in there. It's cheap enough. Just put it all in there. So they just did that, I guess. I want to know how many Apple IIs were sold with only 4K of RAM. Because I feel like that's an option that was probably technically available, but I can't imagine many people did
That's got to be people buying it that are like super rich and can afford it and just want to have one, you know?
Yeah.
It's kind of like when I did this with Xbox One. I bought the Xbox One like launch console, and I deeply regretted it because every version that came out afterward was just better in every single way.
Yeah.
You know?
It's like bigger hard drives, faster. Yeah.
Yeah, just wait a year or even less. Wait 6 months and they're going to have a better version, you know?
Yep. Yeah. The Apple II Plus also had a Euro Plus version for Europe and Australia and a J Plus version for Japan. Those needed to be a little bit different because of the way power and television works in those countries. Like a lot of the way that electronics of the day would work is kind of based on the frequency of the power coming into the machine. So you definitely needed a totally different machine to be able to use like power from a European plug without some kind of converter or something like that. And also they needed to add special characters to the keyboard because they have a whole different way of writing in Japan. So they needed to make a keyboard that could support that.
That'd be really messed up if they sent like an English keyboard to everyone in Japan. It'd be super messed up.
I mean, I'm sure there were plenty of computers that did that too. I bet you there's a lot of people who learned English in Japan in the 80s because they needed to program old computers or they wanted to program old computers.
Oh, yeah.
But in a few years after the Apple II Plus was the Apple IIe, and that was in 1983, just 1 year before the Macintosh would launch. It was a lot cheaper. It was $1,400 at $1,983. So, and that was without the Disk 2 drive. And by this point, like you're not buying this thing unless you also getting a Disk 2 drive. Like, come on, you got to get the disk drive. It also included 64K of RAM, which was higher than the max of the 2 or the 2 Plus. And at the same time, Apple launched the Duo Disk, which lets you use 2 disks at the same time.
Whoa.
Yeah. Big spender right there if you had a Duo Disk.
That's how you know you made it. If in 1983 you had 2 disks.
Yeah, that's right. In 1984, the Apple IIc came out in April of 1984. That was after the Mac had launched. So the Mac was still in the early days and hadn't proved itself yet. People were like, what is this graphics thing? I don't know if I want a computer with this. Also, it was like ludicrously expensive at the time. So Apple continued to support the Apple II with the launch of the IIc, which stood for compact. The IIc had a handle on the back, so Apple marketed it as a portable computer. It was not portable by any standard. The thing weighs like 20 pounds, and it didn't have a screen, and it didn't have a battery. It was not portable. It was portable in that like you could take it from your desk and take it to work, I guess, but it was still very expensive. If you had a use case where you needed to cart this thing back and forth, you probably just wanted to buy a second one and then carry floppy disks between them, you know?
They should just actually have done this. They should have said it was a fitness machine, and then you just use it as a kettlebell. If it's 20 pounds, you can do it. You can just do it as a kettlebell, you know?
That's what they should have done, yeah. But they figured, hey, we put a handle on it. That means it's portable, right?
That's what anything means. You put a handle on anything and it's portable.
It's portable, yep. The 2C also had a built-in floppy drive, which was a first for the 2 series. They got rid of the cassette port because it was lame and nobody used it anymore. And it also had 128K of RAM which was kind of absurd compared to the 64K that the 2E came with standard.
Wait, so this one is the smaller portable version and it has more RAM than the one that's more expensive?
Yeah.
That's really weird.
It was a replacement, though. I think like you weren't really supposed to still be buying the 2E by the time the 2C came out, unless you had like the 2E still carried it still had all those expansion slots, which the 2C kind of got rid of. There's not as much expansion options for the Apple 2C. It has more ports on the back though, so like there's trade-offs,
Yeah.
Yeah. The next model, which was released in 1986, was the Apple II GS, which truthfully was kind of a whole new computer that was just backward compatible with old Apple II software. It used a new 16-bit processor, which was the 65C816, which ran at 2.8 megahertz.
That's almost 3 times the amount of the old one.
Yeah, almost. It also supported really high-res graphics for the time, and it even had a GUI that was controlled by mouse, graphical user interface. So it was like, it kind of felt like a Mac if you booted up with the right floppy, It was a pretty boss machine, and it was like a Mac version of the Apple II, basically. It was really cool. I want one of those super bad.
Put it on your Christmas list, Apple II GS, Tyler.
Apple II GS, it's on my Christmas list.
Are they hard to find?
No, I mean, you can go on eBay and find them. They're just like, they're a little bit more expensive than I would want to pay for one, just because I would like set it up and I would like boot it up and like play a couple of games and be like, wow, that was neat, and then never touch it again. So
yeah,
like, I don't really want to pay like a couple $100 for that,
Sounds like you're talking about my Mac Mini right now. That's what it sounds like.
Hey, I've just set up an Apple II, did the same thing. So, and I just bought a Power Mac G3, one of those blue and white ones, coming in the mail. I'm going to play with it for a few minutes and then I'm going to put it on the shelf and I'll be like, that's a really pretty computer.
That's going to sit right there and everyone's going to look at it and be like, what's that? And then I'll get to tell them a story.
Yeah, exactly. In 1988, we saw the release of the final model of the Apple II, the 2C Plus. This one had a 3.5-inch floppy drive, so it used like sort of regular floppies, and it used an upgraded 6502 processor that ran at 4 megahertz.
Get out of here.
Yeah. It wasn't quite as slick as the 2GS, but it was a lot cheaper, and probably like the kind of people that wanted to buy an Apple II in 1988, several years after the Mac came out, they were probably looking for something that could just run their Apple II programs. They didn't need something fancy like the 2GS,
Mm-hmm.
Like if you wanted the fancy 2GS at that point, you should have just bought a Mac probably.
Yeah. Seems like this like era is definitely, so the Mac's out in 86.
Yeah.
Okay.
88.
So
88. Yeah. The Mac was out in 84.
Oh.
So it had been out for a few years by now. It had some time to come around. There have probably been a couple of models of the Mac. Well, there's definitely been a couple of models of the Mac, some cheaper ones, that kind of stuff. Like the Apple II was on its way out. The thing mostly keeping it afloat though, which is worth noting, and Wikipedia notes this too, is education. So the Apple II sold really, really well in schools because Apple did some really great stuff to give schools really, really good deals. And I think the line of thinking there was like, hey, if we get these kids to use Apple products in school, then when they grow up and they want to buy their first computer, well, they've already been using Apple computers for years in school, so of course they're going to look to buy an Apple for their own computer, right? And so schools loved the Apple II. It was harder to get schools to upgrade to the Macintosh because it was not compatible with Apple II software. So you would have had to get all new software for it. And at this point in time, it was like, schools kind of, they're on limited budget. They're always on limited budget. And so it was harder to get them to upgrade. So what Apple did was they released a line of Macintosh computers called the Macintosh LC line that was aimed at schools. And to ease the transition from the Apple II to the Macintosh, they gave schools the option to buy an Apple IIe that was basically on an expansion card for the LC that allowed the Macintosh LC to run Apple II software. It was basically an entire Apple IIe on a little tiny expansion card, not much bigger than like how big like a graphics card is. It was probably like a quarter of that size, like way smaller than that.
So it's almost like dual booting 2 different computers on one. That's very. That's a very innovative solution for this.
Yeah.
The schools are like, we're going to keep using our word processing program we've been teaching for like 5 years at this point.
Yeah, exactly. And they had all kinds of like educational software. Like they probably all had like Oregon Trail and stuff, which we'll talk about in a minute. Like all this educational software that ran on Apple IIs that didn't transfer over to the Macintosh immediately. So this was like a way to sort of transition people. And I think it worked too, because I know that my elementary school growing up had a whole computer lab full of Macintosh LC2s. They didn't have the Apple II expansion card in it, but I can imagine that was like something that allowed, you know what I mean? Like at a certain point, it's time to upgrade no matter what. But that sort of eased that transition if you wanted it to. So
yeah, I think I mentioned on the podcast already the day that our school got iMacs and how big of a day that was in elementary school. They were like,
man.
Whoa, look at the colors. They're like orange and crazy blue. And whoa.
Yeah, they did that like the summer between like my 4th and 5th grade year, I think is when they upgraded to iMacs. So the whole lab was like these blue iMacs and it was very cool.
Yeah, super exciting.
But yeah, so that's a lot on the history of the Apple II. But let's talk about some games because unlike the PlayStation 3, Apple II's got games.
It's got so much games.
Yeah. So I'm going to go through a list of games. This is by no means meant to be a comprehensive list or even a like top list, right? These are just some games that I thought were notable. And if you think I missed some, which I definitely did, send us an email. Tell us about your favorite Apple II games, codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com. Number 1 on the list, again, in no particular order, the Ultima series. I just want to do the whole series here because the first 5 games were released on the Apple II. And the Ultima series are some of the earliest computer role-playing games. They were created by the legendary Richard Garriott, and the first one came out in 1981, so it was only a few years into the life of the Apple II. And the goal in this game was to find and destroy the Gem of Immortality. Some evil wizard is using it to be an evil wizard, and you gotta put a stop to it by crawling through dungeons, defeating enemies, unlocking the secrets of the Ultima universe. This game is so cool because it was the first open world computer game. All the way back in 1985, game designers were laying the groundwork for games like Grand Theft Auto and Assassin's Creed and all those great open world games that you play today. They owe a little bit of that formula to Ultima way back in 1981. So I think that's pretty crazy.
That is crazy. Also, I mean, and you may talk about this later, but this is like the same Ultima Online is going to become from this, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yes. That was not a game that was on the Apple II, but yeah, Ultima Online is definitely part of that. Definitely part of that series. So
if you'd have told me that Ultima Online was going to be on Apple II, I'd have been like, this is even more crazy. That means they had an MMO on an Apple II in 1985.
There were probably, I mean, there were definitely multi-user dungeons that you could play on like BBSs and stuff, which is like kind of pseudo massively multiplayer online, like definitely the early days of that genre as well, but nothing like the scale we see today.
Yeah, because I think this is like the era of like the mush, you know, the text-based like multiplayer, like that kind of thing, where you're just like the 4 of you are in a shop and you're essentially talking in a chat window.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, those games existed on the Apple II as well, but they're hard to play now because BBSs don't really exist. So that's too bad. In Ultima, the overworld is like top down, but once you get into dungeons, it switches to a first-person view. So now we're setting up for first-person shooter games as well. I think it's so cool that you can like take games from today and like trace their origins all the way back to games from just decades and decades ago.
You know what, Tyler? It is cool, and it's almost what this entire podcast is based off of. So I'm glad you said that. Everyone needs to know that.
You can be 4 races: human, elf, dwarf, and bobbit, which is sort of similar to a hobbit. It just sort of changes how your early stats are distributed and changes your focus while you're playing the game. There are a bunch of classes to choose from too. I'm no Ultima expert. I don't need to get into all that. But I think Ultima 4, Quest of the Avatar, was the most popular. This is the one that took the story in like a whole new direction and made it just a much bigger part of the game overall. Like this was a really, really story-driven game. One of the first games to be truly story-driven. By the time Ultima 5 came out, the Apple II's days were starting to fall behind as PCs started to take over, and even the Mac was like coming into its own. So Ultima 6 did get a Commodore 64 version, so I guess in that sense the Commodore 64 outlasted the Apple II a little bit.
Cool.
That's Ultima.
We should probably do an Ultima series at some point.
Yeah.
You know?
I'd like to play those games and
I would too.
Get into them. Yeah. Number 2 on the list here, Prince of Persia, which came out in 1989. That one's a little bit later in the Apple II's life as well. The Apple II version of this game was the main version of the game, which I think is interesting because it was definitely towards the tail end of the Apple II's life. So most games coming out by this point were like ports of games that were meant for other platforms. But I guess Prince of Persia didn't want to do that. So it gained a bit more popularity when it did come out on the NES and Super Nintendo. And then it came out on basically everything back in the day. So it was really tough to get away from Prince of Persia. It even had a bunch of unofficial ports, especially later on. It's a platforming game where you play as a dude without a name, platforming, swinging, jumping, defeating enemies in dungeons on the way to saving the princess from a bad guy named Jafar, which feels a lot like the Aladdin storyline. But this was a few years before Aladdin, the movie, came out. So I'm sure it's like because this game was drawing from like Arabian Nights, that's those stories. And I think Aladdin was too. So these are really cousins on that rather than like direct family, you know.
If anyone asks, though, I'm going to say that Aladdin stole from Prince of Persia.
Absolutely. I think that is something you can definitely say. But what was really neat about Prince of Persia was that it used an animation technique called rotoscoping, where the developer took video of his little brother running and jumping and climbing and stuff, and then he drew the graphics over the top of that every frame of animation. So when you play this game, the animations look like really weirdly realistic, and it's because they're basically copied from real life. And I think it's really cool to see that in an Apple II game because the graphics are pretty rudimentary, but the animation is just so smooth and like cool looking. I just think that's neat.
Yeah, I think, did we talk about rotoscoping before? I don't know if we did.
I don't know. I don't know if we have. Yeah. It's not used this format of rotoscoping is not used too terribly often. It's really labor intensive. It takes a long time to like draw each frame individually, like tracing like over something else.
Claymation almost like that.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of. So it takes a long time. Prince of Persia is notable because it got a couple of sequels of its own in the original series, but then in 2003 they rebooted the series with that Sands of Time trilogy that was on the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and GameCube, and then again on the 360 they made Prince of Persia, and I think they made another one after that too. So this is a series of games that's still fairly relevant today, and again goes way back.
You didn't really mention the movie with Jake Gyllenhaal.
You're right, I didn't.
Oh, okay.
Pinball construction set in 1983.
I'm so happy you were going where I was going.
So Pinball construction set is actually really neat because it was kind of the first game in its genre. I feel like we talked about it when we talked about SimCity a little while ago because it's in the genre of like creation. Like rather than straight up playing, the point of Pinball construction set was to make pinball tables. And of course you could play them as well. But that's what happened after you had the fun of making the pinball table, which I think is really interesting. It was made by EA, the same company that would go on to make SimCity, so they definitely had some of their roots in this game. And it was released in 1983 on the Apple II, and it also got a Mac release in 1986. It was made by a man named Bill Budge, who had created the Raster Blaster pinball game just a year earlier. When making Raster Blaster, he developed a set of tools that helped him make pinball tables for that game, and he realized that using those tools to make the tables was just as fun, if not more fun, than actually playing those tables. So he decided to make a game based on just making tables. What's funny is what Wikipedia says, that Budge does not enjoy playing games, and that having to play pinball games over and over and over while developing those two games, he called that sheer torture. So I guess that sucks for him.
Wow.
But anyway. Yeah, you can make your own pinball tables in this game, so that's neat, I guess.
By the way, Raster Blaster just sounds like he was just like, "What do you want to name your game?" Like, I don't know, Raster Blast. Like he just made it up.
Yeah, Raster Blaster, and they're like, "Sure, okay, we can put that on a box."
That sounds hip and cool. It is the 80s.
Yeah. Next on the list, Oregon Trail. Oh, now, who hasn't played Oregon Trail?
This needs its own episode, I think.
It does. It really does. There's a whole series of these games, too. And like, there's more than the Oregon Trail. There was like
Amazon
Trail and Amazon Trail. Yeah. But when we think about the Oregon Trail, we always think about the 80s and 90s version with graphics that we all played in school, right? But Oregon Trail actually started in 1971. We're getting a little bit from Apple II history because this is even way before the Apple II. It originally ran on mainframes, and it didn't have any graphics at all because it was made to be printed out on paper. Like each line of what was happening would be printed out on paper, and then you would enter in what you wanted to do next, and it would print out the next like thing that was happening. So it was just all text. It was pretty cool. But the original devices, like I said, they didn't even have screens, so it was pretty just crazy. In 1985, though, they made a version with graphics, and it was also very popular. It was popular for a few reasons. It ran on the Apple II, which was a very popular computer at the time, and it was also very popular in schools. It was developed by a company called MECC, which stands for the Minnesota Education Computing Consortium. Later, they changed it to like Computing Corporation or something. But MECC started because they wanted to coordinate and provide computer services to schools in Minnesota. But the educational software they made to do that became popular around the world, and the graphical version of Oregon Trail was one of the games that they made. And it was also a great educational game. It taught about this expansion time in American history in the mid-1800s while asking players to think critically about how they would survive the trip out west. And I think it was popular because teachers could use it to keep kids occupied. I remember growing up playing the Macintosh version of this game, and it was always like Oregon Trail was never the lesson itself. It was always the reward for finishing up your work early. So like it let those kids that like if they finished early and they might have like gotten into trouble or done stupid things while they were not occupied, the teacher could just be like, go play computer games and be sort of satisfied that they were learning and applying their brains and moreover just being quiet so the rest of the kids could finish their work too. So it worked out for everyone.
Yeah, I wanted to let you finish the whole thing, but I did not know what mech was until today. I seen mech, MECC. I saw that all the 90s, and I was like, I have no idea. I never looked it up. I never knew it was the Minnesota Education Computing Consortium.
Yeah,
so
they just made a bunch of educational games. Really, is kind of the big thing that they did. Yeah,
I think the only one of these I owned was Amazon Trail. And that was fun because it had like cool spearfishing. But I played a lot of Oregon Trail at school, because they teach a lesson like, hey, you shoot too many animals. Yeah, you shot them, but you wasted a bunch of bullets and you can't carry that much meat. And then you feel real bad about yourself.
Yeah. Also, the hunting minigame was really fun because you just like get to shoot deer on the screen. It's cool.
Yeah, it was like early Counter-Strike, just clicking on heads.
Early Counter-Strike. We didn't even talk about what the game is. So real quick, in Oregon Trail, you're the leader of a wagon train that's headed out west. You pick a starting class, which kind of determines the resources that you start with. You buy stuff at the general store for your trip, and you embark on your journey. Along the way, you got to deal with like random encounters and the other harsh realities of being a pioneer in the mid-1800s. If you're good, you make it to Oregon, you win the game. It was fun and educational, and it was like something you could be good at. If you were bad, it's because you died of dysentery along the way. That's where that meme comes from. You have died of dysentery, because it would just kind of happen at random, I feel like. Or maybe I just didn't know what the cause was of it. Yeah, snake bites.
Fording the river, all your oxen die.
Yeah.
It's rough. It's rough. It's rough. Go out there in the Wild West.
Sure was. Number 5 on the list here, Castle Wolfenstein series, not Wolfenstein 3D. I'm talking about the original. So these games were like stealth games, not shooter games. And they didn't actually have that much in common with the Wolfenstein 3D games that id made in the early 90s. They took place in a castle and you were shooting Nazis. But the first two games, Castle Wolfenstein and Beyond Castle Wolfenstein, were stealth games with some shooting elements in them. The goal is to get out of the castle with the war plans while evading and shooting Nazis. In the sequel, the goal is to assassinate Hitler with a bomb in a briefcase, which is pretty crazy.
That's like that movie.
Valkyrie, which was... that was an actual plan, I think, to assassinate Hitler.
Yeah, that was a real history thing, but I was like, I didn't know they made it into a game. Like, especially a game this early.
I know. So, yeah, this game was actually so popular in its day that there were paid cheats for it that you could get that would help you through the game. Like you would buy basically like how you would buy a Game Genie today. You would buy like cheats for this game that would help you get through it. Like I just think that's nuts.
That is nuts.
Yeah. This game would later inspire the Wolfenstein series by id, but like I said, they aren't really related beyond that setting and the kind of original inspiration. But it's a neat game. It influenced a lot of other games. It was kind of the pioneer of the stealth genre, which wouldn't get really popular until like the Metal Gear games a few years later, and then Metal Gear Solid, of course, and then now all of the stealth games that exist these days. But they all owe a little bit to Castle Wolfenstein. One more game on the list here, Maniac Mansion, 1987. You ever play Maniac Mansion?
I've never played this game, and I don't know if I've ever even heard of it.
Me neither, but it was the first game to use LucasArts' SCUM engine. And the SCUM stands for Script Creation Utility for Maniac Mansion.
They just named it after the game they're using it on?
Yeah. But it's important because the SCUM engine would actually go on to be used in a bunch of other LucasArts games from those days, like these like point-and-click adventure games. What was awesome about Maniac Mansion was that it was this cool like graphical text adventure, so I had pictures of what was happening on the screen. But instead of entering commands directly, like a lot of games in those days, the player was just given a list of verbs that they could select. So you would just like click on them or mouse or like move the cursor over them and hit them. So you always knew what was possible in any given area, which kind of streamlined that genre a little bit. It takes a little bit of the mystery away, I guess, but overall I think it seems pretty worth it because sometimes you would just have to fumble through trying to figure out the commands that were right for where you are in other text adventures, and so this sort of streamlined it. The game revolves around a group of buddies finding their way through a creepy mansion. There's a cheerleader that they're trying to rescue from a mad scientist. So peak 1980s storytelling.
That is the most 1980s storytelling.
Yeah. There's a bunch of characters to choose from to fill out your party. They each have their own strengths and weaknesses. And it's got multiple endings too, which makes it kind of cool to replay. The cover of this game just looks like an 80s parody game like that you would see come out today, except this game actually came out in the 80s, so it is unironically 80s. And that gives it a special charm that just can't be replicated by today's nostalgia games. It's got like all of the common tropes of like 80s characters. It's just like, it's so funny. The cover is great. The Apple II version, alongside the Commodore 64 version, is the original release. Everything else came out later, including the super popular NES version, which had a lot of changes made to it because the NES couldn't do as much as the Apple II.
It's hard to click on verbs with an NES controller.
That's right, yeah. That Scum engine is really the big thing that came out of this because it made those kinds of games a lot easier for LucasArts to create. And so they went on to make all kinds of games, and I could probably pull up a list of Scum games, but like... trying to think of other games that were made with them. Like I think like the Leisure Suit Larry series was made with them, some other games. Anyway, they all got their start because of Maniac Mansion and the script creation utility for Maniac Mansion.
You know what? Thank you, Maniac Mansion.
Yeah. Final game on the list, Jaybird. The greatest Apple II game of all time. It was nothing like that rip-off game Q*bert. The goal is to jump on the squares, change their color, and win, and avoid the obstacles. Dude, I finally got my Apple II working on a color monitor last week, and I got to see this game in color for the first time.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. It's so much easier in color. Because...
You were playing it not in color as a kid?
Yeah, because you can actually see the squares change color.
I didn't know that.
I know. I remember squinting at the screen as a kid so hard because when you jump on the squares on a black and white monitor, on the green screen monitor that I used to play on, for those new to the podcast, if you hadn't listened to other episodes, Jaybird is a pivotal game in my childhood. I played it a lot on my dad's old Apple II. It's the greatest game ever made, and I'm going to win a world championship someday. But anyway, I used to squint so close to the screen because there was like, you could see a slight change on the squares that you jump to. But when you play it on a color monitor, it's like blue and pink is the difference between the colors.
So what you're saying is when we host the Jaybird Tournament Championship Series, okay.
Black and white monitors for everyone.
Well, black and white monitors and a color monitor, like two different tournaments.
We have to have two different tournaments. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
color version and
one's
the not
called
version.
easy mode and one's called squinty mode because you're going to be squinting for the other one.
Yeah, that's right.
Good to know.
So yeah, I just thought that was crazy and very funny. It's just a great game. But yeah, that's it. That's all I got for the Apple II. In a coming episode, now that we have this groundwork built from the Apple II, we'll be able to talk about the history of the Macintosh and the history of games on the Macintosh. Because I think some of the people that made games for the Apple II would move on to the Macintosh, but some would not move on to the Macintosh. And we should probably talk about why that is. I'm hoping that I can get that answer for you because I don't know what it is off the top of my head right now.
It's exciting, though.
Yeah, very exciting.
I love this so much. I have no idea. I mean, granted, I think the audience is well aware during a lot of these episodes. I have no idea about these things when we go into them, and except for the ones I researched, of course. But I really was like, I told Tyler before this started, listeners, that I was super excited when I saw this pop up in our Google Drive folder.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Ooh. I'm excited about it.
Apple II is great.
This is a part of my childhood that I don't really think I realized it as I was going on how cool it was, like these old Macs, and Apples and so that. So it's pretty. I got to ask my mom what computer we had. I want to know.
Yeah,
I need to know. Definitely.
And you should buy whatever it is. You should buy it and set one up at home.
I should buy it, set it up, play a game, and then never touch it again.
That's right. That's exactly what you should do. I feel personally attacked right now.
Hey, yeah, I did the same thing. Granted, mine was $15 and it was broken when I got it. So at least I had the fun of putting it back together.
That's true. Yeah, you have the fun is really in the restoration. It's not the actual using it. Like how many people that like get a classic car and restore it and then it's like their daily driver, right? None. They restore it and then it's like sits in the garage and they look at it and it's cool. And sometimes they take it out for a spin when they feel like it, right?
In my mind, they just like grab a lawn chair and sit down next to it and just crack open a beer and just touch like one hand on their van. Be like, I did this. I made this.
In a lawn chair.
I'm going to do the same thing in my room with my Mac Mini. I'm just going to sit in the lawn chair just to be like, I did this. I did this.
I made this. That reminds me, I need to redo the capacitors on my old Mac that I have here too, because the capacitors that Apple used in like the late 80s, early 90s in their computers, and a lot of computers in that day, but Mac specifically, were garbage, and they need to be replaced now before they explode and eat holes in my Mac.
You don't want holes in your Mac. Everyone knows that.
No, you don't.
That's a quintessential part of a Mac computer.
Is how solid and well kept together it is.
Apple tried to sell the Oops, I'll hold Mac, and it didn't work. They didn't sell it.
Didn't work. Nope.
No one wanted the Oops, I'll hold Macintosh. No one did. All right, so...
what you been playing, Mike?
I have been playing Destiny with you, but full disclosure to the listeners, I was camping most of this week, and I didn't get to play video games, and it was really hard. You know, it was just like, I was like, oh man, I think about all the video games I could be playing right now, but instead, I'm in the wild outdoors of Central Oregon. And so I've been playing Destiny with you, though. When I got back, I played a lot of Destiny, just really ripped through it. But I really haven't played a lot of games this week, and I'm kind of bummed. But next week, in the weeks coming up, I'm going to try to play some games that I've owned, but I haven't played. So Firewatch is on that list. Yeah, my girlfriend beat it and really enjoyed it, and I have it for Switch and I haven't played it yet. And then also I bought, and I told listeners about this last week, but I bought Divinity Original Sin 2, but I haven't really had the time to like really dive into that yet. So that's on my list of things to play. What have you been playing this week?
I've been playing a lot of Destiny 2 with you. That's really it. I played some Borderlands 3 today with Kelly. That was fun.
Nice.
We're getting back into it. And I played a match of Halo 3 on PC because that's out now.
I need to download that. That's on my to-do list because I saw
I got my butt kicked, and I may have a lukewarm take. Maybe it's a hot take. I don't really like the PvP multiplayer in Halo games.
Whoa, that is. I think that's one of the hottest takes we've ever had on this podcast. Because people
generally not a fan.
I love it, but I do agree that it has changed an awful lot, like since we were like originally like playing it, you know. And I wonder if it's a lot of nostalgia factor because Halo 5 now, if you try to pick up that game and play multiplayer, you're gonna get your butt whooped. Okay, there is so competitive on there right now, but it's not like the memories that you and I have of playing like Halo 1 or Halo 2 with your buddies, you know, playing like 4 people or 4-on-4 or whatever. I played a lot of Halo 3. I played more Halo 3 than Call of Duty Modern Warfare because that was like the same time. But I have fond memories of that, but I bet you I will also have a bad time if I play it.
We should boot it up. Let's play some Halo 1, 2, and 3 on the old Master Chief Collection and see how we feel about it. Because, like, I don't know. Maybe it's just because I was bad and getting my butt kicked, but, like, it was not fun. It's, like, really slow, and I feel like my bullets don't do any damage.
Yeah, we can,
maybe I just need to
do
get
that.
Good.
And then we can lose, and then we can just go and finally beat Halo Reach. So we can do together.
That's what we need to do is beat Halo Reach.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
So other than that, I think I've been playing. That's it. I think that's really all I've been playing.
That's okay. You know, you have slow weeks. You have busy weeks. You have weeks you go on vacation. We have a lot of emails. I'm going to say this, preface this. We did a call out last week about Ricochet, and a lot of people want to play Ricochet, which is very exciting to me. And so I have a plan for that I will explain after this is over, because I feel like if I say it at the end, people will remember it more, maybe.
That's a good
tactic. Okay, so we're going to go through some of the emails that are not related to that, but here we go. Okay, so here's the first one. This is from Rick. It's from Rick. Rick says, "Hi, guys. Sorry to hear about Spectre 001 spelling." He says, "Opinion of the podcast, but I think you guys complement each other perfectly. Tyler is serious-ish and has the right knowledge, but still funny. Mike is just goofy in the best way and loves to game and brings the humor." Thank you so much, Rick. But you both put your heart into the podcast, and it wouldn't be the same without that chemistry. Thanks, guys. Thank you, Rick.
Oh, that's nice of you to say, Rick.
We read the insults so we can read the compliments and feel better. Ricochet. Okay. This is from Cody. He says, "Hello, my dudes." That's a subject line. Okay. The email says, "Hello, gentlemen." That's a very big switch. Like, hello, my dudes.
From my dudes to gentlemen. Wow.
It's very informal to formal. I like it, Cody. Okay. Cody says, "Big fan of the show. I also love the other podcast you do, Mike. Anyway, I had 2 ideas for episodes. One is an episode on the history of speed running, and the other is on the history of achievement hunting. I think y'all could make a pretty neat episode about those. Anywho, that was what was one game you fully completed and got all the achievements for? This is a question for us. Mine were all the Sly Cooper games and all the Ratchet and Clank games. Never tried to get a platinum trophy in anything else, though. I can go. The one that comes to mind is I got all of the trophies in the Xbox 360 version of Elder Scrolls Oblivion, which is kind of upsetting because at one point the game splits off into two different plots, and if you didn't save knowing that, you have to play it all over again. And so I did it one way, and then I essentially speed run to get to that point so I could get the last achievement. But yeah, Oblivion is a great game. I also did it on Fallout 4. I know it's not as popular, but I don't do it on a lot of games. But when I'm really feeling a game, I like try to do it. I did it on Destiny 1 for Xbox also. I got all the achievements.
Yeah, I'm not really an achievement hunter, although I did get my one platinum trophy on PlayStation 3 was for, and this is on the PlayStation 3 version of the PlayStation 2 classic Ratchet and Clank Going Commando. So I'm with you on Ratchet and Clank platinum trophies. Love Ratchet and Clank. And I definitely put the extra effort in to get the Going Commando platinum trophy.
It's one of those games, man. Yep. One of those games on PlayStation. One of the reasons I don't have a PlayStation hurts my feelings.
I think I also got the platinum trophy for Jak and Daxter. So I only play PS2 games on my PS3, the PS3 remakes of PS2 games that I can get platinum trophies on.
Yeah, I need to get a PlayStation, man. I've been seeing some things on my Facebook, my personal Facebook feed, where people are like, "Why do people not get PlayStation? It has all these games," and I'm like, "I know, but
so many games.
I need to do it. We got another email that is very informative. You ready for it?
Mm-hmm.
This is from Mark. Okay. The subject line is, "I can't believe you don't know natural selection. What are you doing?" I like
Great
it.
question. We often ask ourselves that.
Yes, we do. We do also often ask ourselves that question. Hi, Mike and Tyler. Just listened to your Half-Life Mods episode, and sorry about the email title. Couldn't resist. I'm just kidding, by the way. I'm not expecting you to be fonts of knowledge on all things natural selection. Well, you know what? Thank you, Mark. You should hold us to a higher standard. I like it. While on topic of natural selection, though, my brother was really into the original game, and I learned about it through him. I was quite impressed by how it incorporated RTS elements with an FPS, and I've loved games with commander modes ever since, such as Battlefield 2 and Command and Conquer. Command and Conquer Renegade was also another game that came out around the same time as Natural Selection, which had a mix of RTS and FPS. It's just a pity that game never took off, which I would be interested in doing a Command and Conquer series, because that's one of those memories I have of playing that at like my uncle's house. He had the game, but no one else played it, and I played it at his house, and I loved it, but I just only played it like once a year. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Mark goes on to say, loved Day of Defeat and even played in a couple of clans back in the day.
Nice.
He says in parentheses, we were never any good, but it was fun times. I remembered that Day of Defeat came about along with a slew of other World War II FPS games in the late 90s, early 2000s, such as Medal of Honor, Return to Castle Wolfenstein, Battlefield 1942, and Call of Duty. Probably thanks to the popularity of movies like Saving Private Ryan and TV shows like Band of Brothers. Did you guys ever get into any of these games? If so, which ones are your favorites? The answer is yes, and I love some of these games so much.
Me too. Loved Battlefield 1942. Loved the original Call of Duty as well. Played that a lot at LAN parties in high school. A lot of Call of Duty LAN parties. The original Call of Duty.
Oh yeah, see, I was a Battlefield 1942, but also I was a big Medal of Honor guy. Like I just had Medal of Honor more for PlayStation. That's what my brother had, and I just played that. And so I remember Medal of Honor pretty distinctly as being a fun game. I didn't get into Call of Duty really until I think Call of Duty 3, which is a good one. People love Call of Duty 3.
That was a World War II one. Yeah.
That was still a World War II one, if I remember.
Yeah.
This was before.
It was like a launch title for the PS3, PS3, I think.
Yeah.
It was only on consoles too. That was the thing about it. It never came out on PC.
Yeah, and I was actually really, I remember when DICE essentially and EA only started coming out with Battlefield games and not Medal of Honor, and my brother and I were both like really hurt because our childhood was like Medal of Honor, but we were just betting on the wrong horse essentially. But yeah, so those are our favorites. Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you for emailing us. They are going to say, P.S. Fully support the decision to cover Team Fortress after delving into Quake. Quake World TF was where it was at, so no angry emails from me. Thank you, Mark.
Nice.
I was really nervous about that. I was worried people were going to get mad, but I'm like, there's so much more to Team Fortress than I could explain, I think, and do it justice. So I felt like we had to hold off on that. All right. Let's see here. This is another one from Carter. This is about Half-Life mods. Hey, Carter. Hey, guys. Carter again. Half-Life mods. Who would have thought in the late 90s that there would be so many individual thoughts and ideas stem from one game or engine? Honestly, the only lesser-known mod I knew from the first part of the episode was Hazardous Course 2, and let me tell you, it is not easy. On the topic of other mods in PC gaming, I remember lots of hours playing Battlefield 1942. Sometime down the road, someone released a Modern War mod. Think Battlefield 2.
Oh, Desert Combat.
Yeah, this mod included new vehicles like helicopters. Things were so hard. No, these things were so hard to fly. No one in my dad's group of friends could figure it out. Eventually, after days and days of trying, I figured it out and then completely destroyed them in the game. Great memories and from a great mod. P.S. Slight correction, Mike. My last email was not actually my first. I had sent an email during the Mario Kart episodes back in March. Oh, okay. No harm to foul. Your podcast is amazing, and I will always look forward to Mondays. Keep up the great work. Carter from Houston. Thank you, Carter.
Thanks, Carter. Yeah,
Did you
Desert
play that?
Combat. We played that at the LAN party, the same LAN parties I played Call of Duty at. We played the Desert Combat mod for Battlefield 1942. I don't remember that much about it, but I remember playing it.
Nice. Oh man. Okay. This is actually I wish I put up. You had some fun LAN parties. You had some really cool LAN parties, didn't you?
We did. Yeah. We had some good times.
Jealous. Okay. This is a new email. It's from Gavin from Florida. Gavin says, "Hey guys, I just binged your whole podcast in the past 3 weeks or so, and I must say it's been a great time." Wow, that's a lot of hours of us. I'm currently at a job that I don't enjoy very much and doesn't require any actual brain activity. And I was listening to the same music for months on end and finally decided to try out a podcast. I looked up informational podcasts on Spotify, and this one was recommended to me. I've always loved video games, and a podcast on the history of them sounded right up my alley. I really enjoy the banter between you two and have yet to skip an episode. Somehow, even if I've never been interested in a certain franchise or series, you guys make it interesting and fun to listen, and along the way, and even sway me into adding certain games onto my wish list. Oh man. This is getting long, but in conclusion, this podcast has helped me a lot with my current situation with work and has made me actually enjoy my days as they don't feel like such a waste of time. Keep up the great work, guys. Your new friend, Gavin from Florida. P.S. Keep up the cheesy jokes. I love them. Thank you, Gavin.
Thanks, Gavin.
I'm glad it helps your day out. I've been there before where you're like working a job in like an office and you're like, oh, I need something. And when I discovered podcasts, this was like in, I want to say like 2014, 2013, it really like changed the whole game for me. So I totally understand that. Thank you, Gavin, for the email. Okay. Ricochet. Okay. This is another one. This is from Drew. Oh, look at this. This is like
man.
This is like a different font. Are you looking at this?
Yes.
Do you want to read this one? I've been hogging all the emails.
Holy moly. This is a bit of a long one. Hey, Tyler and Mike, I'll start by saying I really love your podcast. A good friend, coworker of mine recommended I listen since we've both been getting super into game collecting as of late, and I'm really enjoying the energy you two have. Very wholesome and passionate. Unfortunately, I've been out of the world of gaming for quite some time, but I'm re-embracing my love of games. I forget that when I was 13, I was obsessed with Quake and thought John Carmack was the coolest guy in the world. Needless to say, I am really looking forward to your Quake episode. I still remember finding my secondhand PC copy at a thrift store when I was 12 and convincing my mom to buy it for me. Okay, so I'm sorry this email is so long, but I need to share this funny story that I know you two will appreciate. As a small child, I was diagnosed with ADHD, and my lack of ability to focus often kept me from completing schoolwork and usually led me into getting into trouble. With that being said, my parents thought that me having my own computer or gaming system in my room would lead to me playing games all day and never doing anything else. They were probably right, and I agree with their decision now, but you can imagine how jealous I was when they gave my older sister her own desktop PC. I begged them for my own so I could surf the web freely and play games, and eventually they said they'd buy me one for my 8th grade graduation. So, as an 8th grader with no control, I bought a swath of PC games that I'd been lusting over so that when I got the comp, I'd be ready. Games like Half-Life, Fear, Doom 3, and of course, Halo. I'm a sucker for FPS if you couldn't tell. So once I had the games, I couldn't stop thinking about them, and our family computer ran an older OS that wouldn't support them. So one day, while my sister was out with some friends, I snuck into her room and installed Halo on her PC. I hid the folders deep in the computer and made sure there were no icons. Plus, this was back when you needed the disc inserted to play anything. My sister was in high school at the time and had a longer commute than me, so on days I was typically home an hour or two before her. I'd sneak into her room and play Halo for an hour or two at a time, then quickly shut it off when I heard the front door opening. One time she came home early and I had to shut the whole computer off with no save and scramble to my room, leaving the disk in her drive, which she luckily didn't find. The funny thing is, she barely used the computer, but wouldn't let me touch it in fear I'd download some horrible virus. So I played through the entire Halo campaign like this in clandestine fashion, only when my sister's schedule allowed it. I don't remember how long it took me to beat the game like this, but it's super formative memory that makes me laugh. Now that we're both in our late 20s, I told my sister about it over some drinks recently, and she thought it was hilarious. I hope this email finds you both well. Thanks for the laughs and facts. Drew.
That is
oh
amazing.
My gosh, that is incredible.
That is
what a great story.
That is a great story. That belongs on Reddit or something. That's fantastic. People need to know this story.
That's so good.
You just I can just picture like me as a small child running in, playing for like 10 minutes. Oh no, they're home, running out. I can't even imagine. Like, you gotta hope the saves are like on it, you know?
Yeah, and playing with headphones on, but like probably one ear off so you can hear when the car door shuts.
Oh man, sneaky gaming, you know. And also, I feel like with those early, like before Steam times, I remember like being like, will it work? You know, I just always was skeptical if it's going to work or not. So, you know what? Congratulations, Drew. Great job beating Halo. You're the real Master Chief. All of us are posers. This last email is heartwarming. Okay. It's from Xavier. Here it goes. All right. You ready? This is, hello, I am a 11-year-old and I have loved the podcast. My favorite game is Breath of the Wild, but there is one problem. I suck at dungeons and have delayed the divine beasts after beating them. What is a game you love and are bad at doing? Bad at doing one thing in? This is from Xavier.
Oh.
A game I love. This is a lot that comes to mind. Like for me, like level wise, I remember as a child, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game on NES, there was the dam level where you're swimming and you have to disable the mines. Mm-hmm. And it was the bane of my existence. Also, the end of, I believe, the final boss fight in Sonic 2, I got to the end of it a bunch and I just died to Dr. Robotnik every time. I ran out of all my lives. I would have 30.
Oh, you have to fly. You're flying around in space in that one?
Yeah, I'd go through all of them and it would just...
And that sweet song plays? Oh, man.
It's so cool, but I would just fail every time. The Divine Beast fights, like at the end of the Divine Beast dungeons, are nothing to like shake your nose at. You know, they're pretty hard.
Those are hard. Yeah.
Like they're super hard. I remember once I got the Mifa's Grace thing that made it so I come back to life, that was super helpful because I was just, oh man. But do you have one off the top of your head that you can think of?
Off the top of my head, I still haven't beat the final boss in Donkey Kong Country 64. Or just Donkey Kong 64, I guess not Donkey Kong Country. The final boss, you have to play as all the Kongs and you have to use all their special abilities. And I think the secret is getting all of the crystal coconuts throughout the rest of the game, because I think each one you get gives you like 10 more seconds to fight the boss with. And I always ran out of time. And I never beat it, and I feel awful about it. The same thing happened with me in Banjo-Kazooie. I played the crap out of that game in the 90s, and I loved it, but I never beat it because the final boss was so difficult. And finally, one day in college, like 10 years later, I finally beat it on Xbox, and I was like, yes! I am the master. I am the king of Xbox. This is a great question, Xavier. I think this could be a question for everybody. Like, you should send us, if you have one thing you're bad at in a video game you love, you should send it to us for next week. We'll read those. That'd be fun, I think. Okay, lastly, so regarding Ricochet, we've gotten some people saying they want to play Ricochet with us, which is awesome. And I think the easiest way for us to do this, and we'll talk about it next week, I'm sure. And if you emailed us, I'll just send you a link. Is I am going to create a Codex History of Video Games Discord server. I think this is the easiest way. We should have done this a while ago anyway, because this will be even easier for you to answer your questions or whatever. I think it's easier this way too. So it's going to be public. If you email us about Ricochet, I'll just send you an invite and I'll make a channel on there that says like Ricochet or whatever. And then we should be able to post a bunch of fun stuff, and there'll be a voice channel so we can all talk to each other while we play, I think is a good idea. But if you send us an email regarding Ricochet, I will email you back. Just give me a little bit of time to like set up this Discord server, and then we can all play this very mediocre video game together. Can't wait. It's going to be so much fun.
Yes, it's going to be so great. Also, if we have a Jaybird thing in the future, I think this Discord would be good. It is also just going to be good, too, because you could talk about your old video game memories, and we'd love to hear them that way, too. I think it'll be fun. Maybe
I'll break up a stream of Jaybird, and I'll stream some Jaybird into Discord.
That'd be fun. That'd be real fun.
Yeah, dude.
I'd watch that. I think, but we'll do that. And then, as always, you can email us at codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com. You can rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Usually has a rating thing. Just tell your friends about us, really. That's the most helpful thing you can do. And with that, I think that's it for the day, Tyler. Thank you for the amazing episode on Apple, though.
No problem.
All right. Well, bye, everybody.